Hello everyone, my name is Jack. I'm part of the team here at Edumundo, and today I'm going to be doing a quick Q&A recorded session, otherwise known as our frequently asked questions video. I'm going to be going over, as I mentioned, some of the most common questions that we find students have, but also going over some tips and tricks that all teams can use within this simulation. So we'll get straight into it, and what most teams should start whenever a new round begins is taking a look at the ranking table. On this ranking table, you can take a look at every single team that you're competing against, taking a look at their overall scores, but also the position change in terms of how many points they scored compared to the previous round. But how do you know how many points you scored exactly in the previous round? That's where some of the analysis tools within the simulation comes into play and where you can view some more information. So we're going to head over to analysis, then into scores, and here you can see the number of points you received for achieving your targets, the number of points you also received for progress towards meeting your targets. And if unfortunately you made a negative profit loss in the previous round, you'll only score 75% of your points. And if you're in a negative owner's equity position, you'll unfortunately score 0 points. First, we're going to take a look at the points received for achieving targets. And in this section, you can take a look at a table where if you have a green tick next to your target, you'll see that you get the number of points that you've allocated. If unfortunately there is no green tick, that means you are unable to reach this target and therefore scored 0 points. One thing that I do want to draw your attention to is this little text just below one of your targets, which should say key point indicator. This key performance indicator is essentially a target that you have selected in the business plan, which is one that you're going to focus on the most. All it does is simply multiply your score by 5 times. So if, for example, this team decided to actually select the market leader in the quality segment to be their KPI, they would have scored 500 points instead of only 100. Of course, you can change these targets at any point in the simulation, including the KPI, to make sure that you're scoring the most points possible. But if you want to see what progress has been made and what achievement you currently have, that's where the progress table comes into play. In this section, you can see your current achievement over the target that you've set. As we can see with this team, unfortunately, their financial targets they were unable to reach, but I'm going to go over why those reasons have happened later on in this video. But if we take a look at some of the other targets, for example, the average age of inventory, they had selected their target to be 57 days. However, if they increased this target, made it harder and less achievable, down to maybe 16 days, they would have scored almost triple the amount of points that they currently have. Or sorry, even more than triple, nearly 10 times, 11 times more. Therefore, when taking a look at this table, look always at the current achievement that you have. You can then use this information to go, for example, back to your business plan, into your target section, and then increase or make the target even harder. That's about it in terms of all of the scores and the targets and the ranking that I wanted to go over. So the next step I'm going to take a look at is actually on the dashboard. Once you've taken a look at the points that you've scored, you then want to start analyzing the results that you achieved. The first thing that you may want to take a look at is the analysis tool on the dashboard page. When you click View Analysis, you'll see the severe problems, small problems, and if it's in green, luckily enough, you have no problems at all. As you can see with this team, they have quite a few problems in the market as well as their inventory. If we click on market, We can see there are three main red items revolving around the price of their product. Unfortunately for this team, they've tried to enter into all three segments: the price, quality, and customer intimacy. Our recommendation would be to always try and focus on just one segment. So for example, only focus on trying to be in the price segment, therefore offering the lowest price possible. It's unfortunately impossible to try and cater to everyone's needs and wants. So that's why you need to narrow down your approach and make sure you're focusing on your specific segment. There is no winning strategy, I should say, but ultimately, if you make all of your decisions around a specific segment, you're more than likely to do well. There are also some other items that are pretty common for a lot of teams. For example, the very low marketing budget, reliability, older models are all items that I'll get onto later on when we go into the decisions section as well. The other thing that we saw on this analysis tool was the inventory problem that this team had, where we can see there's an extreme number of no sales, where 40% of the demand could not be fulfilled. All this means is that essentially they didn't have enough inventory in stock to make sure that they're fulfilling their demand. In order to fix this issue, we'll go back into the decisions, back into the countries to do that inventory management. But again, I'm going to go over that a little bit later on because we still need to take a look at some of the analysis tools. That's about it for everything on the dashboard. So next up, we're actually going to go into the analysis tab. Then we're going to go into market and we're going to select a country that we've been operating in. So for example, the United Kingdom, and we can see here your total sales, the total segment demand, but also if you click on one of these segments, for example, price, we can see the exact amount of market share that you achieved within this country due to the decisions that you've taken. But before we take a look at that, I'm going to explain a few of the different items on this tool. Firstly, there is the core score, and the core score is essentially the key factors or indicators that is important to this customer group. So we are currently in the price segment, and there are multipliers along the left-hand side which show how significant this factor is. 0.8 is quite a high factor or indicator, compared to 0.2, which is quite low. As you can see, the price compared with competition, average price, and height price are all important factors to those within this price segment. Compare that to the quality, it's not very important to this customer group. So maybe you could do something around your quality and not suffer that badly in terms of demand. Of course, depending on the segment that you're operating in, so if for example you're in the quality segment, you'll see different factors with different indicators and with different multiplier scores. So for example, the quality compared with competition is going to be a lot higher in the quality segment. Based on all of the decisions you've made around these different areas, so for example, price compared with competition is around the price that you've set, as well as the average price and height price is around the price that you've set, and quality is of course the quality that you've selected. You'll then be given a total score and the number of points. These points are essentially how much market share you may achieve. Of course, because there is a multiplier, 100 times 0.8 results in a score of 80. If we want to take a look at the other decisions that we've made within the simulation, we're going to take a look at the multiplier on core score. Using a similar sort of method as the core score, we're sticking with the multiplier-esque theme. As you can see, along this right-hand side are all of the different multipliers, and on the left-hand side, you can see all of the different decisions that you have taken. These decisions can sometimes be positive, but also sometimes be negative. So for example, this focus multiplier is 3.1. 3.1 is actually quite a good multiplier. That means this team is currently focusing only on 1 or 2 markets and therefore are able to focus specifically on those 2 markets. If, for example, you expand into more and more countries, you're going to see this focus multiplier reduce. However, there are some other multipliers and other factors that are maybe not so positive and is actually having a negative effect on their market share. This can be represented if they have a multiplier that is below 1. So for example, 0.65 means you're losing market share because of this factor. So having a very low marketing budget is one of the reasons that this may be. And we saw that factor also pop up in the analysis tool on the dashboard. What we can also see is that the height of the price is also very important within this segment and market. So for example here, 0.66, it's too high, or sorry, the price is too high, resulting in a very low multiplier that's negatively impacting their market share. So what I recommend is take a look at all of these different factors. They're linked to all of the decisions that you've made, and make sure that each and every one is 1 and above. If it is above 1, it's a positive impact. If it's below 1, it's a negative impact. The final thing that I wanted to go over on this page is this total score of all companies, where you can take a look at the market share and the scores of everyone else that you're competing against. Luckily for this team, they're the only one operating in the price segment in the United Kingdom for now. Of course, depending on whatever teams are in your segment, you'll see different scores and therefore different market shares as well. That's about it for everything on the analysis tab that I wanted to cover. The final bit of internal analysis that you're going to have to conduct is taking a look at your results section, where you can take a look at your financial documents, as well as your inventory graphs and staff metrics. We're going to start off with the balance sheet, and on this balance sheet, there are a few items that you really want to focus on. The first of which is the cash and bank account on the assets sort of side. If this number does ever run very low, so for example, if you only have a couple of million left in your cash and bank account, I would highly recommend that you take out a loan. However, if your cash reaches 0 and your reserves are in a very negative position, you're probably bankrupt. The bankrupt error will also appear on the analysis tool on the dashboard, and if this does ever happen to your team, do get in touch with our help desk, where we should get back to you within 1 working day. We'll give you some capital and help you get back into a point scoring position, because if you remember, if you're bankrupt, you score 0 points, even if you reach your targets. So one more time to reiterate, the 2 items you want to take a look at: cash and bank account, make sure that it's in a positive position, and make sure your reserves are not in a very negative position. Moving on to the income statement, this is where you can see your profit and loss, and as you can see with this team, unfortunately they made a loss this year, but there is a few things that I do want to draw your attention to. One important factor whenever you are trying to make a profit is making sure that you have a healthy gross profit margin. If we take a look at this team's gross profit margin, you can see it is really not that good. Our overall or recommendation for an ideal gross profit margin is anywhere between 30 to 60%. What I mean by that is if, for example, you divide this number, the gross margin, by your total revenue, you'll then receive a percentage where that range should be between 30 to 60%, depending on the strategy that you've come up with. When you are setting your price, which will ultimately dictate whatever turnover you get, you need to make sure that you take into consideration not only the product quality cost, so if we go to decisions, product, this quality cost, but also the distribution supplier that you have selected. So for example, you need to add that product quality plus this distribution cost. You can then set a price that is 30 to 60% more than that total cost altogether. I hope that explains everything around the income statement. However, there are some other details you can take a look at the income statement, which are of course important. For example, your general administration costs. Clicking on the eye, you'll get to see an overview of what you're spending on. But my recommendation, if you do want to have a look at where you're overspending or underspending, the cash flow statement is always very useful. Moving on to some non-financial documents, we're going to move to the inventory graphs and tables. We're going to select a country that we're operating in, so for example the United Kingdom, and here you'll see a nice little graph showing the demand and supply. Ideally, you always want to have the blue line, which is the amount that you've sold, in line with the red, which is essentially the total demand that you experienced during that week. If it's not in line with one another, it means you were unable to reach your demand and therefore missed out on quite a lot of revenue. As you can see with this team, that's exactly what happened, and it's probably one of the reasons why they were also in a negative profit position. So what we're going to do is also take a look at this table, and we can see all of the weeks which are highlighted in red as to when this team were unable to meet their demand. We're going to use this information and try and see what the peak demand was during the course of the year, which is around 20,000, or we'll round it up to 21,000. We're going to use this information to try and solve the problem. But before I go into that, the last thing I will go over is the staff section before we tackle some of the issues. So staff, here we can take a look at the amount of staff hired, left, stayed, and the external staff that have been hired. The key factor you want to take a look at here is the external staff that have been hired, because ultimately these staff members are twice as expensive and almost 50% as effective as your regular employees. So you want to try and minimize this number as much as possible. You can always minimize the number of external staff that you hire by simply hiring the employees yourself in the HR section. There is other factors and indicators you can take a look at on this staff page. So for example, you can take a look at workload, also education levels and motivation levels, which are all directly correlated with maybe some of the targets that you have been setting. But that's about it in terms of all of the different analysis, all of the different analysis that you can do within the simulation after each and every round. What I'm going to do now is try and tackle some of the problems that this team has experienced. First of which is around the price that they may have set. As we saw back on the dashboard on the analysis tool, you can see that they are trying to operate in too many segments: the price, quality, and customer intimacy. So what I'm going to do is quickly look at the business plan, competitive, and they're trying to be a combination, which unfortunately isn't the best approach. So what I'm going to do instead is maybe say they want to be a product leader, trying to offer the highest quality possible. We're going to go to decisions. We're firstly going to set the product quality. which is at 5 stars. So keep in mind the price or the cost, which is around 350. Then we're going to select a distributor. We're going to keep with this one, which is only 16 euros. We're going to add those together. So all in all, it is around 300 and we'll call it around 370-ish for the total cost of this product. We're going to use that information to now set a right price that is between 30 to 60% more than that total cost of sales. So for example, go into the United Kingdom and maybe we'll set it at around, I don't know, 700-ish. That is then a good price that you've set in order to operate within the quality segment. If you want to operate in the cost or be a cost leader, an ideal price would be anywhere below 350. Of course, the lower that you go, the better that it is, but ultimately the harder it is to make a good profit. But the lowest price will also often see them get the highest market share. To operate within the customer intimacy segment, a price anywhere between, I don't know, 350 to maybe 650 is probably ideal. And as I mentioned, the quality segment is probably around 700 and above. There are some other areas that I wanted to take a look at. So for example, if you do ever have the message of a very low marketing budget, then all you need to do is increase the amount that you're spending on marketing. I will say that this slider is set in millions and not minutes. So for example, you can spend up to 40 million on marketing within the UK. There is some other quite useful information on the country page if you are struggling to make a profit. So for example, taking a look at the yearly local office costs, but probably most importantly is the number of HQ staff that you're going to need to hire if you want to operate within this segment, or within this country, should I say. Although it says 3 here, depending on the amount of demand that you get, this number can increase or decrease. So 3 is just the bog standard. However, if you experience high levels of demand, you may need to hire even more workers. And the final bit on the countries page that I wanted to go over revolves around the inventory management. If you bring your minds back to the inventory table that we had a look at earlier, we saw there was a demand and supply issue where they couldn't reach 40% of their demand. We're going to use the peak demand that they experienced, which was around 21,000, and we're going to keep in mind the distributor that we've selected. And just to draw your minds back to it, distributor, and it's worldwide shipping, and they have a delivery time of 4 weeks. This is very important in terms of setting the automatic order limits within each country. You're going to have to calculate the lead time to make sure that you have enough inventory in stock. What we're going to do, head back to countries and back to the United Kingdom, and at the bottom we can see that the max at the moment is 25,000, which probably isn't quite enough for the demand that we're currently experiencing. What we're going to do, increase our warehouse size and increase these automatic order limits. We're going to take into account and consideration the 4-week lead time, and maybe we'll set it to 40,000, for example. Our recommendation is usually to set it 1.5 to 2 times higher than your peak demand, but that entirely depends on the distributor that you may have selected and the number of weeks it takes to arrive. Next up, we're going to head over to the management section. There isn't really too much to speak about for this section, but a quick tip, as you can see, if you want to hire some of the better managers, his team has done quite well so far, you'll see that they're not interested. If you click on View Full Profile and scroll up a little bit, you can see why this person is currently not interested in your company. Most of the time, it often revolves around the networking. What we're going to do in order to improve our networking is select the management activity of networking. This will then hopefully unlock some of those better managers down the line. There is also a market analysis feature, so if you do ever want to take a look at the names of the competitors within that market analysis tool, this is how you can view them. Next up is HR. I won't be spending too much time on this, but essentially keep in mind the number of countries that you've entered into, and if you've hired enough employees. If you want to increase motivation levels within your company, you'll of course need to spend quite heavily on giving your staff rewards. If you want to have high training budgets and training allocation, that will also help improve your overall education levels of your employees. Regarding the product decisions, as you can see, there are 2 stars locked, the 6th and 7th star, and this is key to trying to gain a competitive advantage, especially nearing the end of the simulation. The more researchers that you hire, the faster research projects are going to be completed, but do keep in mind that if you do hire new researchers, they're only going to be 50% effective in that first year. After that first year, all of the employees will be 100% effective until you hire a few more employees where those new employees will once again be only 50% effective. Regarding the research projects, you ultimately want to adjust this slider. This slider represents the amount of time you wish researchers to spend on any one project. Therefore, you cannot exceed over 100%. So you can choose to maybe spend 50% of your time on 2 projects, maybe 100% of your time on just 1 project. It's entirely up to you as to how you wish to split it up. What I do want to explain a little bit more is the dark and blue bars just below. The dark blue bar represents the amount of completion that will be made in the next round. That means it won't be applied in this next round calculation, but it's how much will be completed. So you do need to make sure that whenever you are setting these budgets and whenever you are setting the slider time, you need to make sure that ultimately this dark blue bar is going to exceed, for example, 25%, but it will only be applied in the round after it's been completed. The final bit that I do want to talk about regarding decisions is the marketing section. And under marketing, I want to talk a little bit about the price per click and the monthly budgets. For the price per click, it is a number or the amount that you wish to spend on per click. And our recommendation would be anywhere between 1 and 10. If you read the little blue text box just below, you can see you can get a maximum of 20,000 clicks per year. Therefore, multiply 10 by 20,000, that's how much you're going to be spending on this price per click advertising. Of course, if you're doing really financially well, you can choose to spend more. For example, 100, 200 if you would like, but do keep in mind that you're going to need to multiply this number by 20,000. It is completely different and separate for the monthly budgets on social media networks. These are monthly budgets. So for example, you can be spending 5,000 euros, 10,000 euros, 20,000 euros per month. It is again entirely up to you as to how much or how little you wish to spend. That's about it for everything that I really wanted to cover in today's little Q&A or frequently asked questions. Just recapping quickly what you should go over after every single round. Make sure you analyze your results and go to analysis, market, take a look at the dashboard analysis tool, take a look at all of your results, but also make sure you take a look at the news items that are popping up every single round. These news items can be positive or they can be negative for specific regions or for everyone within the simulation. And if you do have any questions that I may have not answered today, you can of course get in touch with our help desk and we should get to you within 24 hours with whatever question you may have. But that's about it from me. My name is Jack and I wish you all the luck for the rest of the simulation.